So, do you want some too?
Here, but yeah, so that's just the background. Well,
so my niece was like, "City Life," and she was singing it. It was funny. So, I was 17 on September 11th, 2001, and I was in my senior year of high school. And that's probably why I remember it pretty well as the fact that one of my teachers, who I'll be talking about, her daughter was in New York at the time. So when I originally went to school and I was in the middle of my teenage self-absorption, which is something most teenagers have, it was about 8:30 in the morning when I think the first plane got into the first tower. And we had all the TVs on in the school. I grew up in a really small town, and so the high school was just all a buzz, like, this is happening, what's going on? And at that time, and it's really it's really weird to think of a time when we didn't know what was going on with 9/11. There was an actual period of several hours where we did not know what was happening, but this was happening, and it was so chaotic and strange and tragic and just this roller coaster of emotions. By the time I went to my second hour, I was helping a teacher, and it was one of those like teacher's assistants classes you got to do if you already had pretty much all your credits to graduate. And it was a pretty easy hour, and I really liked that teacher, which was why I wanted to help her. And she was in there, and we had just realized as the towers were starting to fall, that was when she seemed to suddenly have this moment when she remembered, like, oh my God, my daughter's in Manhattan, which, for the rest of us in Michigan, New York City is almost like a mythical place, particularly for kids. Some of us have never been there. And I remember this moment when she seemed to suddenly remember her daughter is there. And she was really shaking and having such a hard time. And as a 17-year-old kid who has never experienced any kind of tragedy, and definitely nothing to the level of a parent being terrified for a child's safety, I was completely at a loss for how to help her. And so she sort of ran out of the room trying to frantically get a hold of her daughter. And this was, cell phones were a thing in 2001, but they weren't as prevalent as they are now, where everybody had a tether digitally in their pocket. And I remember my teacher just coming back and forth. And at one point, she had managed to get a hold of her daughter, thank God, who was fine. She was in her apartment. But because she had an apartment in Manhattan, the daughter said to her, "Mom, it's just black when you look out the windows right now." There was that much smoke and debris. And the teacher was in the hallway, and I went out there to see her, and she was shaking so bad that I did something I've never done before. I asked if I could hug her, because I was a kid and I didn't know what else do you do when you comfort people. I liked getting hugs from people I cared about. And she said yes. And she let me hug her, and she started to cry, which makes me emotional even now, 20 years later, thinking about it, which gives you an idea of how old I am. But it was hard for me to realize at the time that this was something that I would think about for that long, this human moment I was having with my teacher. And yeah. I recall remembering very distinctly later on when we finally learned more about who it was who was flying and what the purpose was for the terrorists and this message that they were trying to send. And I remember about ready to go home thinking to myself at 17, like, how amazing it was that we even knew that. We had started the day not knowing anything. And so to suddenly hear that these terrorists were from a specific country and this is what they were looking for and this was a coordinated effort, that really blew my mind at 17 years old that we could even know that. And, that it was the first indication of this is something that's going to change. This is an awareness of our national and personal security that I will always have. So I do want to finish by saying that I recall being in my hometown several years later in my 20s. I don't remember the exact circumstances or what I was doing, but I was getting lunch at this deli that is popular in my hometown, which might be closed now, for all I know. And I ran into the daughter of the teacher, the one who had been in Manhattan. We just had been talking in the line. I didn't know who she was. I had no idea what she looked like. And it was one of those moments you have with a stranger where you're talking, and then for some reason we managed to say like who we were, and I said, I went to high school here and blah, 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 and she suddenly says, "Oh, you're Natalie." And I remember being, a little weirded out, like, well, why does this strange person know who I am? And she told me that my mom, or her mom, my teacher, had always talked about how kind I had been to her on the day that this happened. My teacher now, she's passed now, so it's really sad to think about. But it was another lesson that I had in my 20s of how impactful we can be in someone else's life and in what they experience. So something I try to think about every time I have to have a moment with someone is that I should be kind, because I don't know how long they're going to remember this. That daughter had no reason to remember who I was. She went through something very different than what I did. I can't imagine the level of trauma that causes. But she knew who I was because I was kind to her mom. I hugged her mother at 17 years old when I never wanted to be kind to teachers or be seen by my friends to be kind to teachers. So it's something I think about a lot.